We turn our attention then again to Shakespeare's great comedy, A Midsummer Night's Dream. Last time I talked about the green world, the term that Shakespeare criticism often uses to talk about that world of nature to which characters escape in romantic comedy, a world of romantic freedom that allows them to get away from the conventions and the authoritative structures of the city, of civilization. I want to focus on a rather different aspect of this play this time around. I want to start from a fairly common human experience, at least for those of us who have to attend a lot of committee meetings at a university. When a department is deciding what faculty members to hire, you might think the main thing we focus on is the mind of that person, him or herself. But you'd be wrong if that's what you thought. Because if one were to simply tape record our conversations and see how much time is devoted to an actual discussion of the mind or the products of the mind, that is, the writings of this or that candidate, you'd find that that's a relatively small, not to say trivial, part of the discussion. A much larger part of the discussion, both formal discussion but especially informal discussion, the sort of discussion that makes somebody into a candidate, does not focus on the candidate in himself or in herself. It focuses instead on the perception of that candidate by other potential hirers. So that we're at least as likely, indeed we're much more likely, to spend time in conversation or in gossip about what other institutions might be trying to hire that candidate. One way to make yourself an attractive job candidate to one important institution is to somehow get the news to leak that you're also a candidate at another elite institution. Often we don't even consider somebody a candidate. They're not even on our radar screen until the moment we hear they're being considered by somebody else. Our desire for the candidate then seems to have less to do with the candidate in itself than it does with the candidate considered within a network of prestige, of recognition. It's insofar as a candidate is attractive to another department we consider a rival, at least an equal and maybe better than us. It's within that network of competitive prestige that a job candidate takes on salience, becomes interesting and important to us. So that one way to become a strong job candidate is to control the ways that your rivals see you as an object of interest by their rivals. Now, this way of generating interest in somebody is not all calculated. It's not all cynical. not by any means. A lot of what we find interesting or attractive comes through our imitation of desires. Imitation of desires that other people have whom we admire or whom we consider our rivals. And of course, often enough, those we admire are exactly the same as those we consider our rivals. One hallowed romantic strategy, if you're going to be going to a party where someone who's attracted your romantic interest is going to be, is never to arrive alone. Arrive with an attractive person who will appear to be a rival to the person you're trying to attract. You become more attractive insofar as you're seen as the object of romantic interest by somebody who excites the admiration or the competition of other people. Does this mean that you wouldn't be loved for yourself? Well, that depends on what your self is. If you think yourself is some wholly individualized thing that has nothing to do with your relationships to anybody else, with anybody who finds you attractive or anybody who finds you a rival or anything else, if you have a radically individualist conception of who you are, then you're likely to be a bit insulted, not to say outraged, if the main causal factor that draws you to the attention of somebody is that you're the object of romantic interest to somebody that this other person finds admirable, worth competing with. You want their affection to attach directly to you, so to speak, without any mediation. You don't want their desire for you to be the product of their desires imitating somebody else's desires. So that one hackneyed version of this structure of romantic desire as being something that we catch like a contagion by imitating others. One example of this is the way it can seem that one has either 0 dates to the prom or too many dates to the prom. The way that somehow some people become dateable in a way that seems impersonal. And other people are somehow left out of that social network. But that once you're in that social network, there's a kind of impersonal aspect to it. People move around in their partnerships. And those partnerships can change magically in the twinkling of an eye. A Midsummer Night's Dream is a particularly focused investigation of this aspect of romantic interest, of erotic desire. The way that we tell ourselves that we want to be loved in a radically individualist way. And that we tell those we love them in a radically individualist way. But yet, when we look at what happens from an outsider point of view, it can often appear that it's a matter of accident. whether romantic desire attaches to this or that particular person. And the changeability of that attachment can make it look like our desires, our romantic desires, are imitative rather than being primarily attached to individuals. The way that this comes out in A Midsummer Night's Dream most directly, I suppose, is out in the green world, in the forest, under the influence of the magic potion of the love juice. When suddenly two men, Lysander and Demetrius, who take themselves to be utterly devoted to Hermia, arise and find they're utterly devoted to Helena. The extravagant language they use to praise Helena upon awakening is precisely the same language that they use to praise Hermia. And particularly in the language that the play moves to, there is a kind of doting on the beloved, a kind of idolatry, a projection onto the beloved of something divine or sacred. Now, by making of the object of your romantic attention something divine or sacred, do you in fact respond in a radically individualist way to something in that human being? Or do you in fact strip that human being of everything individual to him or to her and make use of an utterly general rhetoric of idolatry, of divinity, of beauty? When Lysander and Demetrius and Lysander, two men we're told at the beginning of this play, are virtually indistinguishable from each other. When those two men change their romantic allegiance from Hermia to Helena, they don't change their romantic rhetoric. Why do all lovers sound so much alike if erotic love is radically individualist? One possibility is that the true self, that erotic self that the lover attaches to, is not individualized. That the true self for which we would be loved is in fact something ideal, something of an idol. So that the lover's projection onto us of what is, after all, a fairly stock set of rhetorical gestures, that projection is not cynical or mistaken, but it reveals to us a rather uncomfortable fact. A fact that what makes us lovable is something general or universal, rather than something particular. In this respect, A Midsummer Night's Dream replays some of the issues we've already seen in both Platonic dialogues, both in the Phaedrus and in the Symposium. You remember that in the Ladder of Love, in Diotima's speech, one of the questions we asked is whether love ultimately attaches to an individual, or whether it just attaches to impersonal properties that an individual might happen to have. In the Phaedrus, when the lover is driven to erotic madness by the remembrance of the truly divine things through the sensual beauty of the beloved, is that well described as love of that particular beloved? Or is the beloved's sensuous beauty, sensual beauty, only the occasion for the lover's return to a depersonalized beauty, a depersonalized experience recreated through remembering. So A Midsummer Night's Dream presents us with a problem about idolatry, about doting, a problem about why it is that romantic attachment seems voluble, changeable, and that the rhetoric of that kind of romantic attachment always presents itself as a true discovery of something unique to that individual. A rhetoric transferable from erotic object to erotic object. Those of you who've been fortunate enough to fall in love with more than one person so far, I don't know that you kept tapes of what you said, but if you had, how different would they sound? How many different pet names have you had for your beloved? Are they all honey? Are they all sweetheart? Are they all stud man? You can have that one for free. How much repetition have you noticed being embedded in your erotic rhetoric? How transferable has the language of love been from one accidental object to the next? Now, there are many excuses we can offer. It might just be that you're not very creative. But it might just be you're not very perceptive, and all the objects of your love look exactly the same to you. But does the static character of our language, given the mobile character of our beloveds, give us pause to thought? How radically individualist are the objects of our love? Another aspect of A Midsummer Night's Dream that is not wholly comforting from a romantic point of view is how hard it is to keep the characters apart. Demetrius and Lysander, Lysander and Demetrius. Who cares? You only need one date to the prom, and it doesn't much matter which one, does it? We're introduced to these characters exactly because they're indistinguishable. Lysander, when he defends himself, so Hermia's dad, Aegis, talks about what a great guy Demetrius is. And does Lysander says, oh, I'm even better? No, he says, I'm just the same. I have as much money. My family background's just as noble. And besides that, your daughter loves me. Yeah, well, she used to love Demetrius. Demetrius and Lysander are so much alike. Why do you think Lysander got interested in Hermia? You don't suppose he might have been imitating Demetrius's desire for Hermia, do you? Why did Demetrius get interested in Hermia? Well, here's another question to ask. In a passage that I read last time from Act 3, Scene 2, Helena gave a big speech about how much alike she and Hermia are. 2 cherries, 1 stem. Great. Does it surprise you that the 2 men are identified as so much alike we can hardly tell them apart, and that Helena identifies the two women as so intimately attached that they're really one made out of two? No wonder their erotic attachments are subject to such mobility. Why shouldn't they be? It's not just the relationships between the men and the women in this group of 4 young people that call for some analysis. It's also the relations between the 2 men and between the 2 women. Could it be that it's the relationship of rivalry and of closeness between Lysander and Demetrius that accounts for why, as soon as one gets erotically interested in one of the women, so does the other one? Could it be that it's the closeness of Hermia to Helena that accounts for the otherwise awkward coincidence of their erotic interests? Is it possible that the bonds of competitive intimacy between the same-sex couples are a deeper engine of erotic interest than the purportedly individualist erotic bonds of the heterosexual couples? Does this play say anything that indicates that competition and rivalry is a potent engine of erotic possessiveness, the desire to have that beloved as yours in competition with your rival who wants it as his or as hers? The answer, of course, is yes. The answer is yes, and it's illustrated by the 2 other main couples, the 2 king and queen couples, both Theseus and Hippolyta, and Oberon and Titania. About the first thing that Theseus tells us, he says it to Hippolyta, is that I won you with my sword. Now, of course, there's a certain amount of sexual byplay on what might count as his sword. But the notion that it was in a competitive situation that he and Hippolyta first formed a bond that's then transformed into an erotic bond is where the play begins. It's the front door to this play. Later on, when we meet the fairies, it turns out that Oberon and Titania are having a lover's quarrel. And they're having a lover's quarrel over possession of a beloved, a boy who they both want to be their page. Why does Oberon want this boy? He wants this boy because Titania has this boy. Oberon's desires are utterly imitative. So that in the 2 royal couples, what we see is both the competitive engine of erotic desire and its imitative character. We're much less likely to apply this to the young people. Because after all, we're just like Lysander and Hermia. Most of what we know about love, we've learned from love stories. Now, Lysander says to Hermia, or he almost says to her, when he says, the path of true love never did run smooth, he almost says to her, Hermia, we're just acting out an established script about how lovers go. And if there weren't any interesting obstacles and impediments to our love, we wouldn't be in love. It's the adventure and the difficulty that actually makes us feel in love. So don't feel so bad. In fact, maybe we should scatter a few obstacles around to get our love charged up. Remember in Hannah and her sisters, the scene where her parents, where Hannah's parents, have fallen into an argument that they've obviously had many, many dozens of times before. And Hannah, as the big sister fixer, comes over to calm them down. And so they're making a set of charges against each other that they've always made. Hannah's dad accuses Hannah's mom of being a shameless flirt. Hannah's mom accuses Hannah's dad of sleeping with every ingenue in Actors' Equity. That bickering, that rivalry, allows them both to recharge their own erotic energy, their own romantic interest in their spouse, through imitating what's probably a more or less fictional rival. So Hannah's mother says, "Oh, you've always been so attractive to the ladies." But then she has somebody to catch her desire from. She can feel her husband's attraction by feeling jealous. And her husband performs exactly the same projection onto her. Of course, this leads to, if not an actually physically violent, certainly to a verbally violent exchange. But it's that sense of competition and that ability to catch one's desire mimetically from somebody else that keeps the erotic energy in their relationship. In Andre Dubus's story, The Timing of Sin, when Luann starts to talk to her friend Marcia, one of the first things she says to Marcia is that she's really been burning it up with Ted lately. What was the provocation to this sudden flare-up of sexual energy she has for her husband? Her little incident with Roger. She responds mimetically to her husband. She channels the erotic energy that she gets from almost committing adultery with Roger into her sexual life with her husband. A Midsummer Night's Dream raises the prospect that virtually all erotic energy has within it this mimetic, this imitative component. And that the desire we think of as so basic and so focused on an individual as that particular individual, that it's almost all a social desire, a placement within a network of imitation and competition. One way to put this point would be to say, you could write A Midsummer Night's Dream with no magic at all. because the sudden shift of these two almost indistinguishable men, Demetrius and Lysander, from one object of romantic interest to the other object of romantic interest, is completely explicable on the most natural of causes. But this natural cause is one we'd prefer not to have exist. The cause is that when we see one person love somebody or fall in love with somebody, we're much more likely also to find that person attractive. Part of the comedy, but it's a fairly biting comedy, of A Midsummer Night's Dream, when considered from this point of view, comes in the superior attitude that the aristocrats all adopt to the lower class guys, the rude mechanicals who are putting on the play of Paramus and Thisbe. The rude mechanicals are all worried that their play might be too vivid, and it might scare the aristocratic ladies, which would get them all in trouble. They're afraid that the aristocrats won't be able to make the distinction between reality and theater. So they think, well, maybe we should have a prologue that says, don't worry, it's just a play. Or maybe in the lion suit, you should be able to see the guy's face out of there so you can say, don't worry, it's just me, Snug the Joiner, playing the lion. I'm not a real lion. Don't run from the theater. Now, of course, this is presented to us in a play that we're watching. So there's a rather dizzying set of issues about theatricality here that Shakespeare's playing on. We're watching people putting on a play inside a play. What's our own response to them? Well, Shakespeare tells us something fairly uncomfortable again about our response to the play by showing the response of the aristocrats to the play. The aristocrats make fun of the rude mechanicals in their play. Because the aristocrats can see right through the theatrical illusion. You might say that what the aristocrats find funny about the lower class people's play is that the lower class people's play isn't finely enough constructed to produce a theatrical illusion. The aristocrats, what they see is a bunch of rude mechanicals trying to put on a play unsuccessfully. And so they laugh at them, not because it's funny, but they really laugh at them with a kind of contempt. They laugh at them for the incompetence of their theatrical illusion. When we look at the aristocrats laughing at the incompetence of the theatrical illusion of the lower class people, do we take up the same position to the aristocrats that they're taking up to the lower class people? When we look at their love affairs, and we can see that this is a structure that's artificial, we can see that they don't love anybody in themselves. They're just caught up in a social network of erotic energies that are continually redistributed. When we take up that perspective, we see the aristocrats too as enmeshed in a play, in a story, as Lysander all but says. But that enmeshing, do we apply it to ourselves? Do we think of ourselves as deserving the same kind of moral critique that the aristocrats deserve? for taking up their position of superiority? Are we so sure that we ourselves have escaped from theatricality in our love affairs? The next time you're sure you're in love, Shakespeare's play seems to suggest, check out how much you sound like the last time you were sure you were in love. The possibility of the substitution of the rhetoric of love is a threat not to love itself, but to a certain view of love, to a radically individualist view of love. The one character in this play who seems to have no anxieties whatsoever about theatricality is Bottom. You remember in 1-2, when Rude Mechanicals first come on the stage and they're getting their parts, Bottom wants to play every part. Every time a new part's introduced, says, oh wait, I can do that one too. Paramus, yes, I can do that. I can do Thisbe. I can do the lion. I'm a great roarer. He enters utterly into the play. And what we see of Bottom later on is that when he is translated, transfigured, and has the ass head put on him, does he seem nervous? No. He sits down and thinks, oh, that's wonderful. Could you bring me some hay? He simply inhabits the new role. He moves right on into it. He doesn't have any sense of falseness in the fact that he's playing. That's how he is who he is. Bottom becomes Bottom by playing a part. Asshead, no asshead, lion, hero, heroine. He enters into each of them with an incredible exuberance. There's something about him that reminds me of the way that Luann tries to live her life. As if he's fully present all the time. Every moment is a moment of rapture for him. For him, theater is not to be contrasted with some other real thing. Theater is the most real thing there is. Playing is the most real thing that there is. Shakespeare has set us an interesting choice toward the end of this play. At the beginning of Act 5 is what's probably the most famous speech in the entire thing. And this is Theseus. Notice, too, that Theseus thinks that these young people are really quite funny in the way they fall in love, and their desires all seem to be matters of imitation and competition. He never thinks to apply this to himself. Never occurs to him to take up the third-person perspective on his first-person love. So here's what Theseus says at the beginning of Act 1 of Scene 5. Theseus is like some other men that I've known, sometimes with self-knowledge, in that he doesn't really listen to his prospective bride's question. He just gives an answer without trying to figure out what she in fact asked. Hippolytus says, "'Tis strange, my Theseus, that these lovers speak of." She's trying to capture what's strange about it. And Theseus, he gives a solution. Now, this is advice to all of you who some days will be husband. When your wife says, "I think there's a problem about X," don't be in such a rush to say, "Oh, I know how to solve X. I can fix that. Give me a hammer, I'll pound on it a while." Theseus says, it's more strange than true. I never may believe these antique fables, nor these fairy toys. Lovers and madmen have such seething brains, such shaping fantasies, that apprehend more than cool reason ever comprehends. The lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact. One sees more devils than vast hell can hold. That is the madman. The lover, all is frantic, sees Helen's beauty in a brow of Egypt. The poet's eye, in a fine frenzy rolling, doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven, and as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown. The poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. Notice when he says, one sees more devils than vast hell can hold. That is the madman. The lover, all is frantic, sees Helen's beauty in a brow of Egypt. Notice the repetition of hell there. Not only is there the character Helena, there's also back in Act 1, Scene 1, in Hermia's own mouth, a twofold repetition of the word hell that bears comparison with Theseus' own language here. So Theseus says, individuals, they make the stuff up. They got big imaginations. He doesn't pay any attention to the social character of erotic desire and romantic interest. It's as if each and every one of those people out in the woods had made up their own story. And Hippolyta, quietly, but with great precision, puts her finger on what's wrong with Theseus' view. She says, but all the story of the night told over, and all their minds transfigured so together, more witnesses than fancy's images, and grows to something of great constancy. Theseus thinks that he can explain away the mobility of erotic interest by just saying that, they're all like poets, they make it up. It's just an idle fancy. But Hippolyta says, no, that's not true. There's something deeper here. There's something about our sociality, about our togetherness, that this story reveals. In a speech that's clearly the competitor speech to Theseus' speech here, this speech that's rather reductive of poetry and appearance, and particularly of theater, Bottom gives his great speech. This is on page 69 of this edition. So this is Act 4, Scene 1, not very many lines before Theseus. So Bottom has just come out of the enchantment, and he wakes up. And he's still on stage. So this is at line 199 of Act 4, Scene 1. Bottom wakes. He says, when my cue comes, call me and I will answer. So he's waiting for the other guys he was practicing to play. He says, I'm waiting for my cue. He says, my next is Most Fair Paramus. And then he notices nobody's around. He says, hey ho, Peter Quince, Flute the bellows mender, Snout the tinker, Starveling. And then it starts to come back to him, his experience of being translated. He says, God's my life, stolen hence, and left me asleep. Notice he speaks in prose, as Shakespeare's low-class characters usually do, whereas Theseus spoke in verse. Then he says, I have had a most rare vision. I have had a dream past the wit of man to say what dream it was. Man is but an ass if he go about to expound this dream. Methought I was... There's no man can tell what. Methought I was, methought I had. I was thinking, tried this big snout. But man is but a patched fool if he will offer to say what methought I had. The eye of man hath not heard, the ear of man hath not seen, man's hand is not able to taste, his tongue to conceive, nor his heart to report what my dream was. He's starting to really like the ineffability of the experience of being transformed. He says, I will get Peter Quince to write a ballad of this dream. It shall be called Bottom's Dream, because it hath no bottom. Bottom in his speech displays no anxiety about whether his dream, his transfiguration by the magic of love, whether it was real or not. For him, its reality is his ability to play it. He compares this, or rather Shakespeare compares it, to the reality of finding what's divine in human life. The footnote in this edition identifies for you the very specific passage from St. Paul that Shakespeare, most uncharacteristically, has been staying very close to in this speech of Bottoms. Theseus is a kind of philosopher. He's reductive about theater. He's reductive about playing. And so for him, love, if it has a theatrical dimension to it, is something that's not real, something that's only fancy. For Bottom, things are exactly the opposite way. It's exactly because the world of love can be played, because we can find there a script, that it seems to him not merely real, but something that he uses the very words of God to describe. Who is at the bottom of A Midsummer Night's Dream? Is it King Theseus and his philosophical authority? Or is it Bottom? Is it this man who's all theater and for whom love presents no anxieties? If we had an answer to that, we would know Shakespeare's true mind. But that seems to me as unstatable as what it is the ear might have felt. See you next week.